VIBErations podcast, episode 44, Patricia O'Sullivan. Recorded the 26th of January 2023. Hi, I'm Gary Brightman, and this is my periodic podcast called VIBErations. Established in 2018, Vibe is a book and music shop situated in Mui Wo on Lantau Island in Hong Kong. Since our last podcast, we've had two further events at the shop. Carl Wagner and Saxa Kai played keyboards and sang their own brand of soul and pop music. Carl from the Funkophones is a great entertainer and kept the crowd singing, clicking and clapping, with Saxa duetting on a couple of numbers. What a great gig that was! Patricia O'Sullivan came to Vibe to talk about murder on the islands. Author of Policing Hong Kong, An Irish History, and Women, Crime and the Courts, 1841 to 1941, she gave a very vivid talk about the dastardly deeds of years gone by. I interview her for this week's podcast. We also welcomed Susan Mertens, Pat England, and Charlie Walsh to the Vibe team. That brings us up to full capacity with 5 women now helping out at Vibe. I've never felt so marginalised in all my life. Given their out-and-out rivalry, I decided to introduce an Employee of the Month scheme. Our first winner was Charlie, making the best sales for December. She gets to have her picture displayed in the shop for a whole month and enough cash to buy a large bag of rice with. Well done, Charlie. You can see all our Tiny Desk gigs and book talks on our Facebook channel, Vibe Silvermine Bay, or on our YouTube channel, Live at Vibe HK. Subscribe soon to avoid disappointment. And so to this week's interview. Patricia O'Sullivan is a writer and researcher on the lesser-known aspects of Hong Kong's history prior to 1941. Stumbling over an article concerning the death of her great-uncle in 1918 when an inspector of the Hong Kong police, she quickly became immersed in the social history of colonial Hong Kong. As a specialist recorder teacher, in a career spanning 3 decades and more, she has had the joy both of introducing thousands of young children to music and developing the skills and musicianship of senior students to diploma level and beyond. Now she writes full-time while keeping some teaching and playing to keep herself sane. Pre-COVID times, she spent many months in Hong Kong and is currently back here. Patricia's second book, On Women, The Wrong Side of Law, was finished during the first lockdown and came out in December 2020. Since then, she has been working on the next book project, Hong Kong during World War I and the policemen who fought in that war. Alongside that, she continues to contribute articles on other aspects of Hong Kong's social history, all of which can be found on the Insight page of her website at socialhistoryhk.com. Welcome to Vibe, Patricia.
Thank you, it's delightful.
Do you have a favourite book or author or authors?
I have a absolute favourite author. P.G.
Right,
Wodehouse.
excellent.
P.G.
Wodehouse.
Yes. So I'm never without a P.G. Wodehouse.
Excellent, love it. I've read a number of his, and there must be a lot in that collection. P.G. Wodehouse.
It's 99 full-length novels. So yeah, just the language, the use of language is just so gorgeous.
Yes.
You know, it's sort of almost every page you can find something.
And do you have one in particular that you go back to more than others, or?
No, not really. There's the Jeeves and Worcester collection, because they're always around. But this is wonderful. This is in Hong Kong Central Library.
Okay.
And they've got a really nice little collection of the Woodhouses, and they've got sort of the ones that are not the old reliable. I've never come across this book one before.
Excellent.
So, it's one I haven't read, and
Yeah.
there it was on the shelves. And
It's a little piece of gold in Hong Kong waiting for you to
absolutely.
find it.
Absolutely.
Fabulous.
So,
And I think there's something nice about a hardback,
Yes.
plastic
Yes.
sort of covered.
Yes, nice. Yes,
But
proper.
yeah, you can really. It kind of take me back to school days.
It's
almost.
proper
I think.
library book.
It is proper library book, isn't it?
Yeah. P.G. Wodehouse, big Hong Kong connection.
Now, okay.
Yeah.
Just
right. His father was the police magistrate here for sort of 1880s and 1890s until he retired.
Wow.
So he came out as in the 1869 as a cadet, a civil service cadet.
Okay.
So he was had intensive training in Cantonese.
Right.
And then could be put in any job in the government. This was the idea.
Yes,
they had six young men who were going to be able to sort of help them out and be able to, because at that stage the government couldn't speak to local people at all. Really, they had to use sort of intermediaries.
Yeah.
Henry Ernest Wodehouse was his father was spent all his career really in Hong Kong.
Right.
And his P.G. Wodehouse's oldest brother, P.P.J. Wodehouse, Philip Peveril Wodehouse, was deputy superintendent of the police here.
Unbelievable.
For much of his career.
That's fantastic.
So, so that
what a wonderful connections.
I've always read Wodehouse since I was about 12, and then come here and think. I asked a friend of mine, said, "This Wodehouse guy I'm meeting, is he anything?" Yeah, he is.
Is any relation there? And did P.G. Wodehouse come to Hong Kong? I guess he would have.
No, I don't know. He didn't.
No.
I think he may have come as a very small, 2-year-old child.
Okay.
But no, he was brought up by aunts, and he was in boarding school. He was at Dulwich College in South London, and then he went into the HSBC in London, and then left the HSBC in order to write.
Okay, fair enough. So totally different.
Yes.
That's it's a nice piece of history there.
It's
actually,
a nice connection,
for his father
isn't it?
and brother. Okay, so we'll move on. Favourite musical artist?
As a profession, I'm a recorder player, recorder teacher.
Yes.
So I'm involved in early music.
Yeah.
So my favourite is actually a singer, a countertenor called Andreas Scholl. He's a German countertenor who has the most exquisite voice, very rich, but right up in that really high register over the break.
Okay. Yes.
And he sings the Baroque. He sings a lot of high Baroque. I mean, my personal interest is earlier Italian Baroque music like Monteverdi and Frescobaldi. But I love the stuff he sings. The Bach, the Vivaldi.
Yeah. What medium do you listen on? Just incidentally, CD or tapes?
CDs.
Yeah,
CDs. Yeah. I'm not awfully into listening online. I mean, I spent too much of my life online.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think, if I might be so bold, our generation, we didn't really come from online, so we still connect with things we can see and touch and smell. So next, do you have a preferred drink? Milk, okay.
Champagne.
Good. Oh, milk and champagne, a perfect combination. There's one end of the scale to the other. Milk for breakfast, champagne for dinner.
I suppose tea. Yeah, I mean, I drink enormous amounts of tea, but I've always liked milk.
Yeah, well, me too. Actually, I'm a big milk drinker, and I have a big cereal every morning, I still love milk. Do you have a life motto?
I suppose I'm very positive, and there's always a better way of looking at something.
Yes.
You can always find good in something, whatever situation.
For me, it seems easier to look for the positives and ignore the negatives.
Yes.
Why get dragged down by the negatives, really?
That's it. And things do happen. Awful things do happen.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
The COVID lockdown, it was a real tough time in the UK.
Yeah.
But there were so many good things that came out of it.
Yes.
The sense of community, the sense of supporting people, the appreciation for what others did for us, the appreciation for people like the shop assistants,
yes,
the people on the tills,
the day-to-day people,
market. The fact that you went out to see them and you could actually talk to them, once every 2 weeks or something or other.
Yeah,
and,
yes.
Just so I think we all. So there was so much good.
Yeah, that came together through in adversity, I suppose. And
that's right.
I mean, the health service as well. I could see from here. I loved the fact that they would have the weekly. Everybody get out of the house and clap and applaud them. I thought that was wonderful, actually.
Yeah, I mean, even doing that in my little road. It's a funny little road. It's a series of older houses on one side and this newly built semi-social housing on the other side.
Yeah.
Near the twain do meet.
Right.
But when it came to clapping, everybody was there, and there would be sort of waves either side of the road, and how are you? Yeah, you okay? Yeah, good.
That's
and,
nice.
At least there was a little bit of connection.
Connections.
So even that had another.
Yeah. So there was an undercurrent of positivity there as well. Yeah. Whereabouts do you live in
Watford.
Watford.
Yeah,
Okay.
so about 60 miles north of London.
I know Watford. I know of Watford. I am from North London, so not too far away. Just a little jaunt up the M1 or whatever. What was the best advice you were ever given?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. You were kind enough to let me know what I was going to be asked.
It's more fun to spring them, really.
When, as a sort of sixth former at school, we started and run a school newspaper.
Okay.
And one of the teachers, an excellent teacher who really supported us, I remember when we'd been let down by somebody, he said, Patricia, this is something you'll learn. If you want a job done properly, do it yourself.
Yes.
And so that followed me through for quite a lot until I suppose I was running a Saturday morning music school.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realised if I followed that, I had to do everything.
Yes.
And actually what was much better was if you want a job done well and you can't do it, give it in total to somebody else.
Yes.
And then as long as you're not, as long as you don't try to still hold on to it. And
trust them, empower them to do the thing.
And they come up with much better stuff than you had. Well, I had anyway. So that was, it was. I remember consciously turning that on its head.
Yes. What inspired you to write in the first place?
Write about Hong Kong.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Write about Hong Kong. Yeah.
Well, 90-year-old aunt in Dublin says to me, Patricia, you're good at that googly thing. Go on and find out why Uncle Mert died. Uncle Mortimer O'Sullivan, Inspector Mortimer O'Sullivan of the Hong Kong Police, had died in 1918 in what was the family knew was called the Gresson Street affray. But that's about as much as the family knew.
Right.
Because my aunt, who was asking me, she was the daughter of Patrick O'Sullivan, yet another Hong Kong police inspector.
Right.
And they'd been in Hong Kong at the time, and Patrick had shut down information about his brother's death, partly because 2 days later his own little daughter died of meningitis in Hong Kong.
God.
They were over in Taiping Shan, in a station there, so it was a very traumatic time. So the family knew nothing. So go on that googly thing and find out. Okay, so I went on that googly thing.
Yes.
Found an article that was written by a serving policeman about the Gresson Street affray, and it mentioned that the grandson of the other European who had been killed still lived and worked in Hong Kong. This other European's name was Henry Goscombe Clark, and his grandson, Dennis Clark, was somewhere around in Hong Kong. Okay. Right. There was a tiny little photograph of him. I mean, sort of about 6 pixels or something like that. I exaggerate, but
I get the picture.
The picture,
or
yes.
not the picture.
I went on the internet and thought Dennis Clark is such a it's quite a common name really. Dennis Clark, Hong Kong. Came up with guy who was the head of the Conrad Hotel in Hong Kong at the time.
Okay.
Conrad Hotel had a similar picture of about 6 pixels, and I tried to marry them up and thought, might be. Then I tried to find an email address, and there was no email, so I sort of made up one that might be a corporate email address.
Yeah.
And sent off an email saying, excuse me, approaching you like this, but might you be the grandson of Henry Gosling Clark, who died at Gresham Street in 1918? I am the great niece of Mortimer O'Sullivan, who died at that event. Do you know anything more about it?
Yeah.
And 2 hours later, I had this email saying, Patricia, how wonderful, 100 years nearly, and our two families are now connected. You've got to come to Hong Kong to step in your great-uncle and your grandfather's footsteps. Come and stay at the Conrad and be my guest as long as you like.
Oh my God, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that was, initial 5-day trip over. And Dennis, who's still a good friend, and I'm hoping he's going to be here on Saturday, he really did, sort of give me the works, the princess works.
Oh, how nice.
And he was in touch with the policeman who'd written the article, who had been researching my family, and then he opened up a whole raft of... Wow. We got to see around the old police station Type 1 before it was revamped. Before there was anything in sort of revamping, really, and all around Gresham Street and everything else. So what happened in 1918 when my great uncle was killed in Gresham Street in a shootout, basically, and then what turned up in that first trip over was that there were not just my great-uncle and my grandfather, who came from Newmarket in County Cork, which is a little tiny town in North County Cork, but there were a whole raft of other men, and I think there were sort of at various points up to about 20 men in the Hong Kong police force who came from that tiny town. The town has 1,000 people in it.
Yes.
So that was really quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'm talking over a period of not quite a century, but nearly that. And they brought over wives and created families here.
Yes.
So so there was a lot, and suddenly there were a lot of stories to write.
Yes. Yeah, because they would have branched off.
They branched off.
And even you could have even if you drilled back, actually, they would have all probably known each other from the pubs and the churches of Newmarket.
I mean, there's two really two families that come over. So there's one man who comes over in 1864, William Lysett, and he lived just south of Newmarket in a little sort of like hamlet just south of Newmarket, and then George Hennessy, who came in 1873, he lived in Newmarket town itself. They may have known each other in Newmarket, but I would love to have been a fly on the wall when they discovered each other.
Yes, absolutely amazing.
It's not like nowadays when we can bump into people and yes, 6 degrees of separation, all that sort of thing. Yeah. I'm there. I mean, to bump into somebody when it's a minimum of 6 weeks on the boat to get here. You've come from Newmarket.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, isn't it, for them, I would imagine, because, there was just newspapers in those days. I think it's prior to radio as well.
Well, prior to radio. Yeah. And, a letter takes 6 weeks to get there, and, then you've got to wait for them to write, and then you've got another minimum of 6 weeks to get the reply.
Communications,
so, if you get 4 letters a year, that's what you could expect, really.
That would have been prolific.
Yeah.
Okay, so you made the connection between the two families.
Yeah.
And that really, from there, you could find out enough about researching for the book.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of people, and I did get help from. Not so much from my immediate set of cousins, but from the. Because it opened up into all sorts of other, there were cousins of my grandfather and relatives of Lysett's descendants and things like this. And they were very interested in what I was doing, because very few of them had very much idea
Yes.
And so they'd have little snippets. So I was getting all these lovely snippets together and putting together.
Yeah, stitching it together like a patchwork quilt sort of thing to make a nice, good rounded story.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was really, the first book,
Yeah.
and how that came about. That was released a few years ago on Blacksmith Books.
2017
Yeah.
by Blacksmiths, yes.
Yeah.
And the lovely Irish consulate here gave me a fabulous launch for that.
Oh, did they?
Yes.
David Costello?
Well, it was David Costello's predecessor, Peter Ryan.
Okay.
Right. But David is equally as supportive.
Yes,
I'm really
good.
grateful for that, yeah.
Ah, good to hear. All right, and then moving on to your second book, Women, Crime and the Courts, 1841 to 1941. I'm halfway through that at the moment. I'm absolutely loving it.
The first book they had the big events that happen that are in all of the Hong Kong histories. They're there in my book because they need to be, because the police were involved in them. And there's little bits about the families and that sort of thing, but I couldn't actually really find out, how much did it cost? Where did you get bread from? What about milk? They come from Ireland, they're used to drinking lots of milk, like me. It's all of those sort of little questions. Who does the shopping? Who does the washing? Where does that happen?
The sanitation was horrendous, wasn't it?
Don't talk about it. We won't get onto the sanitation.
The sanitation stank in those days, didn't it? Yeah. And it's because that was one story actually in the book, just to dwell on that.
Oh, yes.
Area.
The ladies
being fined for disposing. They had a job which was to dispose, which they could earn extra money doing, disposing of the
the night soil.
Business.
Night soil, as it was called. Yes. Night soil continued right up to the 1970s or so.
I was quite surprised that they were only allowed to do that between the hours of darkness.
Yes.
And that they got fined and treated as being criminals for doing something which was helping humanity.
And they'd had to sort of change their times because the ferries had changed their times, and they couldn't. They had to be taken. All the night soil had to be taken away onto Kowloon and then further on.
Yeah.
And so the poor women. I mean, actually, it did get sorted out to their.
To their thing, but
benefit,
very unfortunate, and they were almost expected to charter their own boats to get rid of the effluent or whatever. Unbelievable stories actually. All that, and also, the crimes, the Muay Thais. Very sad. Young girls sold into effectively a life of slavery, and then bartered around. Right. And
it was a trying to find out about the ordinary life that pushed me. And you can't find out about ordinary women's lives if you look through the newspapers. They don't feature. Whether they're Chinese or whether they're European or whether they're Portuguese, they just don't feature in the newspapers until they do something wrong. Until they appear before the magistrate, and then you start finding out, as you say, about. And you see all this thing about sort of the kidnapping of children or the kidnapping of young girls into prostitution, into brothel slavery. Or you just see the little tiny things like the woman who's just charged with obstruction because she's set up her stall, or she's charged with hawking without a license. An old woman who's hawking without a license and.
For goodness sake, she's struggling.
She's not got 2 cents to rub together.
No. And also, I think that what struck me, that women were being used as a cover as well. There was the bomb incidents. And they were clearly being used to bring down gunpowders and bomb-making materials from mainland. Get over the border at Shenzhen for the bomb at the races.
That's it, the racecourse bomb. That's right. That fortunately didn't happen. The other thing they would be cover for is for the smuggling of weapons, smuggling of opium, and for forged coins. I mean, there were loads and loads and loads of forged coins going around, and forged notes as well.
This was before Hong Kong had a proper sort of currency.
Yes,
wasn't
a single
currency.
Yeah, it rather accepted currencies from mainland at some point. Yeah.
Yes.
And elsewhere in the region.
Yeah.
It was much more fluid in those days. We forget how recent that is.
Yeah.
Really.
And of course, once notes, I suppose, are forged, they're passed to somebody else, and if they're caught in possession with them, they become.
If you're in possession, being in possession of is a regular charge.
Yeah. So it goes down to that lovely level of detail about people, and you can imagine them moving around the city and being, I suppose, to be honest with you, I felt a little bit like they were being victimised. They were trying to just live their lives, really, in very poor, unsanitary times, and just make enough money to survive. And if they weren't making money to go out gambling, particularly, or anything, fabulous nights out. It was to really exist, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. A lot of the book is about poverty. In effect, there are in women crime in the courts. There are the women who commit heinous crimes, dreadful, awful crimes. But even some of those, it is done out of desperation.
Yes, yeah.
And generally, people are just trying to make enough to eat.
To eat, yeah.
Feed the family, feed the children.
Well, it paints a very, very vivid picture, and I'm really thoroughly enjoying that. And I think you're providing a service there which isn't really generally out there, because there's not many books written, is there?
No. And unfortunately, they're all written by Westerners, and I'm just adding to that stock.
Yes,
but it needs writing, so
it does. Yeah. The stories that need to be told, I think, and they're very genuinely historic interest, and certainly, my preferred reading, really. Okay, so and then moving on to your third book. Then, what's the premise for writing that?
Third book is really comes out of the wartime experiences of the men I was writing about in the first book, where a lot of these Irishmen went to serve in the First World War. So there was, when the First World War broke out initially, I mean, a few men, a few of the civilians who signed up to fight went home by themselves, or if they were on leave, they joined up. But the place was very lean in terms of its Western manpower. Yeah. So they couldn't have loads of men saying, "Oh yes, I'll go to fight. I'll cross over and fight there," because they had to keep everything going here.
Yes.
And so in the end, about 70 of the police went, but they only went when the police reserve had been established.
Okay.
And that the police reserve were the ordinary businessmen from all the communities, so both Chinese, Indian, Portuguese and British, European, who volunteered to do a number of shifts of police work, of just basic patrol work.
And didn't you say there was something about the hierarchy in those times that was very much levelled
that's
in terms of race?
In the reserve. So the regular police, the hierarchy was such that the Europeans were always on the top of the ladder, and then the
Sikhs and the Hong Kongers,
the Indians below that, and the Chinese below that again. But because the administration wanted to get the support of the most prominent men in the community of all ethnicities, they had to ensure that all the ranks of the different ethnicities were equal, so that they had a Chinese superintendent in the reserves long years before they had a Chinese superintendent in the regular police. And that Chinese superintendent was at the same rank and at the same authority as the British superintendent, as the Indian superintendent, as the Portuguese superintendent. So it achieved parity
at that
in
time,
the reserve
which was a sort of
force.
1914, 1980.
At least 10, 15 years earlier than the regular force.
You're writing the book. It's about the police, of course, that came back from the war, I guess.
Well, it's the police at war.
Yes.
Obviously, I've written about the reserve force and the police who went to war. I'm co-writing this with a friend, Steve Verrills, who is a former policeman here and has military experience, military interests, because I do write a lot of war history in this. I've been through the war diaries, and I'm writing the conflicts on the Somme and everywhere else, and I don't know military history, so so Steve does an awful lot of that side.
It must be a whole new language of speak there.
So that's is a good collaboration there. And then to some extent what happened to those men. I'm touching on all the civilians. There's about 500 civilians who went to war as well. As 400 and something civilians, and then the 70 police, mostly about the 70 police, but I do touch on the others, the civilians, because there's very interesting stories there.
Hopefully we can corner Petersbury on Saturday and see if it'll blacksmith book it for you. And so that's
hopefully by the end of the year.
By the end of the year, you hope to finish it. Okay, so that's good. All right, well, we'll very much look forward to that. All this writing, started sort of in 2000, around 2009 for you. Here we are, 2023, believe it or not, and. So you're on to your third book. What other things do you do? Do you have any hobbies?
Well,
do you have time for anything else?
Now, as a musician, you're sort of you're doing what you're passionate about. I mean, and then writing is the other passion, and the whole history thing, and so I don't need a hobby because I just If I've been writing all day, I just go and sit at the piano, start playing, start singing, start working out some music. That's just takes me out of one mode of thinking.
I think it's such a wonderful balance, actually. You've got a sort of a day job, which is writing, and I write as well. And so you're working through all those processes and that way of thinking, and then you just release with some nice piano and recorder music in the evening. It's the perfect balance, it seems to me.
It's a good balance. Yes.
And do you play recorder or any instrument
outside? Well, no. The only thing, I mean, I've got some teaching going on still, and I've got some teaching of senior diploma students, which is great because that means I'm playing and teaching music that is sort of challenging. That keeps my skills going. And I run a church choir, and I have to do a lot of music for that, and I play the organ there.
Okay.
So I mean,
organ.
My organ skills are not great, so I'd have to do a lot of practice. I tell you, an awful lot of frantic practice.
Excellent, but it must sound wonderful, I'm sure. Playing the organ in your local church.
Yes, sort of. Fingers crossed and everything else. Sort of
comes through.
Get through. We get by.
Okay. All right. Good. And so here we are in Vibe Book and Music Shop. Saturday, you're coming over to talk about murder, no less. So that's the subject. Interesting that you've murder on the islands.
Murder on the islands, yeah. When I had this opportunity, it then thought, yes, actually, what have I got? What murders can I, or what crimes on the islands? There was very little crime reported on the islands except the big ones, except the murders.
Okay.
Sadly, no, not sadly at all. I've only got one Lantau murder.
Oh, we love a juicy murder over here.
Yes. I've only got one for you, but it actually happens in Moiwo, so that's not too bad. But so I go around Chung Chau and Lama and on the water and things like that. Not all women as protagonists. Some of them. I mean, then the women are victims if they're not protagonists, not the murderers.
Okay.
but there's some interesting ones, and it's all in the period between, I think, 1907 to 1927.
Years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And of course, life on the islands was a lot more simple in those days, wasn't it?
It was very, very
farming
different
and fishing. Really.
Yeah, and very different to life in the town.
Yeah, in Victoria.
Yeah, one of the guys who might have committed a murder, who was actually hung. I'm not entirely sure that he was responsible at all, but I have, the way of telling it, I'm having him reflecting on the fact that, here he is stuck in Victoria jail, and it absolutely stinks, and he doesn't like going over to Hong Kong Island anyhow because it absolutely smells and back on, if you get fresh air back on Cheung Chau, you might have fish, but you've got fresh air as well.
Yeah, that's probably more of the punishment is being in that. So it paints a very different picture, the stark differences really between island life at the turn of the last century to living in what must have seemed like a built-up complex cosmopolitan town of Hong Kong and Victoria,
and very very ghetto-like in Victoria as well.
Dark shadows, dangerous nights,
dangerous corners, dangerous alleys. It's a vast. The building. We think of the buildings as being very congested now.
Yes.
But they loom over us, these great skyscrapers. But there, the gaps between buildings were so much smaller again.
Yes.
As we've said, sanitation was atrocious, and people's propensity to keep domestic animals everywhere, underneath a house, in the house, wherever, and all living cheek by jowl with humanity.
Not the most desirable places. Big trading port, of course, in those days, and constant goods on the move, as well, wasn't there? So,
and a lot of poverty, awful lot of poverty. I mean,
Okay, so Saturday. It looks like, to me, there's a real buzz around Moi Wo and around Hong Kong. So I think we're going to have quite a few people here on Saturday. We're going to go out live on Vibe Silvermine Bay, which is the Facebook thing. So 2:30 till around 3:30. Thereafter, we will put it down on YouTube. So it'll be on the YouTube channel, live at Vibe HK. And we'll probably have a bit of cheese and wine on Saturday as well, I think. Why not? Maybe a bit of champagne.
Milk and champagne.
Yeah, milk and champagne for the author. Okay, so that just remains for me to say, Patricia O'Sullivan, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks very much, Gary.
You can listen to all our VIBErations podcasts, published on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Amazon Music, TuneIn and Alexa, and a whole host of others. Or you can watch on our YouTube channel under Live at Vibe HK, or follow the links from my website, vibehk.com. The opening and closing music comes from Celestial and is called Green Island Dub, and is on the Retrospect vinyl album On Sale at Vibe. Finally, a reminder that Vibe is open 7 days a week, every day of the year, from 12 noon until approximately 6:30 p.m. Well, that's it for another week. Thanks for listening to the 44th Vibe Book and Music Shop podcast called VIBErations. I'm Gary Brightman. You get my vibe?
Can you imagine what this old island must have looked like to those Dutch sailors when they first saw it? Fresh green. Like a dream of a new world.
They must have held their breath. Afraid it would disappear before they could touch it.